Hey everyone, I've been playing around with gluten-free sourdough lately, so I've made myself a brown rice sourdough starter. There's my regular whole wheat starter on the right, but I've made this new brown rice one, and I thought I should take this chance to show you all how to make a sourdough starter again, just give an updated video, but this time I'm going to make two starters side by side, a brown rice flour one and a whole wheat flour one, just to show you how easy it is. All you need is a couple of glasses or a couple of jars. Something with straight sides is really helpful. You need a scale. Well, you don't need a scale. I'm going to give you some volume amounts. It's fine. It doesn't need to be that precise, but it is a bit easier with the scale. And some water. Just some filtered tap water is fine. Any kind of drinking water that's not too heavily chlorinated should do the trick. I also like to use these long-handled parfait spoons and these jar spoons, as silicone spatulas for scraping down the sides of the jars. They're really, really handy as well. So day one, to get started, obviously you probably want to choose which one you're going to make, but I'm going to demonstrate both of them side by side just so you get the idea. I'm doing exactly the same thing for both of these starters. I'm starting off with the brown rice one, and I'm adding 30 grams or about 3 tablespoons of, this is freshly milled brown rice flour that I milled in my mock mill. I'm adding that to one glass jar, and to the other jar doing exactly the same but with whole wheat flour. This is just my regular hard white wheat that I use for a lot of my bread making. So add your flour to your cup or your jar or whatever you're using, and then to that you want to add about the same amount of water by weight. So 30 grams of water if you're using a scale, or about 2 tablespoons. It depends on where you live though, because Australian tablespoons are bigger than other tablespoons, but if you're using a scale, that's the easiest way to go. Once you've got the water and the flour in your jar, just give it a stir. So through this whole process, I do everything first with the brown rice starter, which is always on the left. So I'm just mixing that through now. You want to really mix everything very thoroughly, get lots of oxygen in there. We want to grow the yeasts and the lactic acid bacterias in this starter, in this batter, and those yeasts are all present on the whole grains that we've milled into flour or that you've bought as flour. I'm just mixing up the whole wheat one now. So we're adding water to that, and it's going to activate those yeasts, and they're going to come alive and start to grow within this culture medium, which is also going to feed those yeasts because of the carbohydrates in the flour. So we're just wanting to mix the flours and the waters, and the flour and the water, I should say, the waters. And I like to scrape down the sides of the jars. I think that it keeps the whole process a bit cleaner. You don't get any dried, yucky bits on the side. So if you can, get a spatula of some sort. Silicone is great, and scrape down the sides. And cover. And what you want to do is just leave it at room temperature. So it's winter time in Brisbane at the moment, so our temperatures are cool but not really cold. It's a nice, good time of year really to make a sourdough starter. In hot weather, this whole process will go a lot faster, and you just got to watch it. So all you do then for this initial part is you don't do anything to it yet, except a couple of times a day, one at minimum. Give it a stir, give each one a stir. You're probably only making one, so give your starter a stir, and then scrape down the sides again. And all we're doing for the stirring is just making sure that no molds or anything can develop on the surface, and we're just introducing more oxygen into the mix to feed those yeasts that we're trying to grow in there. So I've stirred both of those. This is still on day one in the evening, and I just put the caps back on. Day two in the morning, again, I'm just stirring these again. We don't want to do any discarding or feeding of the starter until it activates. So the first couple of days, we're just doing this stirring scraping down the sides, just kind of basically just keeping it nice and fresh and introducing fresh oxygen into the mixture to help feed the yeast. And yeah, keep those sides clean if you can, and just monitor it. Try and do that once or twice a day, and that's all you've got to do until you see the starter wake up, which you will see pretty soon. Notice how the texture on the whole wheat one is quite different. It's real stretchy because it's got gluten in it. Also, by the way, if you want to make a gluten-free starter but your kitchen is not gluten-free, just be very, very careful about making gluten-free baking products for people who, really need to have zero gluten. It's dangerous to be contaminating a gluten-free starter with wheat. Here we are, day 3. The bubbles are here. They look so good. It only took 3 days for these starters to activate, which is pretty standard. That's how it's always worked for me in the past. This is the wheat one. You can see it's super duper bubbly. And this is the brown rice starter, which is super duper bubbly as well. It's looking very good. So once they've activated like that, and the only way to tell really is that they have bubbled up and they're looking like they're alive, now we can start discarding and feeding. So you could just feed the starter without taking any out, but if you do it like that, before too long, you're having to feed the starter a lot, and you're going to end up with a great big container full of sourdough starter. So the best way to do it is keep the quantities really small. That way you're not wasting too much. All you do is just tip out most of it and leave just a couple of teaspoons left in the bottom of the jar. So you're not having too much wastage at all. You're keeping everything small, and it's a really easy process. So once you tip out most of it, add 20 grams. You can add 30 if you want. I just chose 20 because I really like to keep the quantities small. Because you are discarding a bit, you want to keep that to a minimum. So 20 grams each of water and flour, and just stir that up. So this is fresh flour and fresh water going into this activated starter now, and we're going to do this a couple of times. And this discarding and feeding cycle that we're going to go through with both of these, it just keeps the starter strong. It helps it to become a more stable culture, and it keeps the quantities nice and small so we don't end up with a ton of it. So I did the same for the whole wheat one. I took out all but a teaspoon or two, and I'm adding in another 20 grams of new flour and 20 grams of water and mixing that up. I'll put a link in the description box to the written quantities if you want to know what they are. Mix it up, scrape down the sides, and just wipe your jar. So there we go. Day 3, first feeding of the starter. Put your discard that you're collecting in the jar, put that in the fridge, because you can put that in a loaf of bread later if you want to. Day 4, here we go. It is risen again. They have both risen again, and they're looking really healthy. I'm just going to repeat that discard and feeding process again. So the more you do this, the more stable and stronger the culture will become. The yeasts and bacteria that you want growing in your sourdough starter will become stronger and more dominant within the medium. So we just keep doing that. Same as yesterday, just feed it, stir it, scrape down the sides, and put the lid back on. So this is the brown rice one first. And the whole wheat one. I really love using these small quantities. So many videos I've seen, people using great big cupfuls of flour and cupfuls of water and ending up with this giant big jar full of starter. It's really not worth it, because you are discarding some of this. You can put the discard in pancakes and things if you want to and use it, but I think for this beginning part, keep it really, really small. There's no need to have a big jar full of starter. And there's the wheat one. So that's day 4. They've been fed again. So you just repeat the discarding and the feeding for another day or two, and then until the starter is activating reliably, it's smelling good, it's looking really bubbly. And just note that you do want to look for bubbles rather than a big rise, because only really thick starters will rise up. So just look for the bubbles. Here we are on day 6, so I've skipped a day there. Day 6, it's all working well. So now I'm going to feed up these 2 starters one more final time to increase the volume to get them ready to have enough to make a loaf of bread, essentially. So I'm feeding them with about 50 grams more of flour and water this time instead of the 20, and that just increases the volume, and that will give you about 100 grams of starter to use in your bread recipe. So this is the brown rice one. It's had a big feed up this time. A final feed up, so you can see it's quite full in the little cup there. And this is the whole wheat one. I do exactly the same thing. I don't discard any this time because I'm giving it a lot of new fresh flour. It doesn't need to have any discarded. So 50 grams of whole wheat flour for that one, 50 grams of water, mix that through, mix, mix, mix. And then scrape down the sides as usual. So these starters, by the end of this day, you're going to see pretty soon, they rise up just beautifully, or they bubble up just beautifully. And here they are late in the afternoon on day 6. If it was summertime here, these would have risen up a lot sooner, but sourdough starters really are temperature dependent. This is the wheat one. It's just looking great. If I wanted this to rise up even higher, you would have to add more flour. You need a really thick starter to make it rise up a lot. But these tiny little bubbles in this brown rice one in particular, that's just the perfect sign of activity. That's all you need to look for. It doesn't really matter about the consistency of your starter. These are super alive and healthy and active and ready to be just stored in the fridge. I've got a video about how I store my starter in the fridge. I'll put a link to that below if anybody's interested. And here's the discard jar. So there's not a lot that I generated, not a lot of waste. You can compost this, you could make pancakes with it, you could do whatever you like. It might have some funny flavours because it's not mature starter, but it won't hurt you. You could put it in bread if you wanted to. This is a gluten-free loaf that I made with the gluten-free starter that I made in this video, just to show you it works. It's a beautiful loaf, and I'll be sharing some recipes on that soon. And this is the wheat one on that one there. I ended up putting all of that discard from that jar as well as the whole wheat starter because I don't need them. I've already got established gluten-free and whole wheat sourdough starters. I just put all of these into these loaves. And that is it, everyone. That's how easy it is to make a whole wheat or a brown rice sourdough starter. Just make sure, again, that if you are making bread for people who have celiac, that you are not contaminating a gluten-free starter. This video was just to demonstrate the process. If I really wanted to make a gluten-free starter, I would not be making it side by side with a wheat one like that. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. Make sure you check the description box for the links for further information. And I'll see you again soon. Bye.